Hello and welcome to our blog. I am Jim Cuervo, Senior Instructor and Support here at Digital Drafting Systems. Today we are looking at creating a custom panel for a pattern-based curtain wall. This panel will then be applied to a massing family to see how it works. Let's begin by creating a custom pattern-based panel by going to Families, New. In New, we will look for the curtain panel pattern based, which is this one right here. We will select it and say open. Now that we have our panel pattern based file opened, let's go ahead and select the grid that is this one right here. Okay, and upon selection, we see that we are able to select different types of patterns that are available in the software. Let's go ahead and select the triangle bent option here. Okay, at which case, as you can see, it's giving us some reference lines, which are the green ones, creating a rectangle right there. Let's go ahead and make the horizontal one half of the vertical. So instead of 10 feet, let's make it a 5-footer. Okay, and let's say apply. And at which point we're going to then add a reference point or point element reference in midpoint here and midpoint there. Okay, once we do that, we will go ahead and select this point here and this point here, create a reference line based on those 2 points, and then we'll do an additional one right here. So we do it this way. Go ahead and create our reference point by saying reference first, point element second, make sure that it draw on face is selected, and we come and identify the midpoint of this particular reference line right here and click on it. We do the same thing here on this side. Click. So now we go to modify and we see that we have an additional reference point there and an additional reference point here. Let's go ahead and define a point between point 1 and point 3, or rather a line, a reference line, by selecting the reference point 1, selecting the reference point 3, and coming over here to the spline through points selection, and we will say that this is a reference line. We will then follow with selecting this point here, and we'll select now this intersection point number 2 here, and we will do the same thing. Once this is done and created, we will also turn this one into a reference line. Once it's turned into a reference line, we will go ahead and define a point element along the line. It's already selected to draw on face, and we will select to draw on this face. We will hit the escape key, okay, and with this brand new point selected, we will select that point, and we will say hoist point by intersection and define the intersection to be the one between the line on which the point lies and this intersecting line, at which point that particular reference point moves to the intersecting point of those 2 lines. Now that we've moved the reference point to the intersection, let's go ahead and select this particular grid reference line, or rather reference line in this one right here, and we'll say in the references, not that it's a weak reference, but it's not a reference, and we will go ahead and deselect visible for now, okay? And at that point, we will now continue creating our beautiful pattern. Very well, now that we've got that defined, let's go ahead and define a new reference point, but we're going to do that slightly differently. We're going to say reference point, okay? We're going to say point element, and we, instead of using the draw on face, we're going to say draw on work plane, okay? And in that, we'll come over here to the reference plane, click anywhere here, and we'll tap. And we should be able to locate the reference plane that is right there. Okay, so we'll say no. Okay, and then we'll go ahead and tab a little bit here, and we can now select it, okay, here, because this one is really allowing us to actually do an offset and give it an offset of, let's say, about 4 feet from the point. We will have two remaining points. We have this point here, okay, which is a reference point, and we have this point up here, which is not really a reference point at this time. We will be using that later to define it as a reference point. We will then continue by adding a parameter at the offset here for this particular point that we just created and raised. So we'll go to the dimensions offset, go to the point here that opens up the dialog box, in which case we can then create an additional parameter. At this point, we will then hit the new parameter. We'll call this one height. Okay, it is going to be a type. Is an instance? No, it's just a type. It's a dimension. We leave everything as is, and we'll say OK. Once this is done, we'll go ahead and make sure that this is highlighted, so it then is now controlled by the height rather than the offset, as it is now. So when we come over here to the family types, we can see that the height is part of the family types parameters. With this step completed, let's go ahead and create then a reference line between this point here and this one, between this one and this one, and between this one and this one, defining our little center point star element for our little triangular panel shape that we're working on right now. So we do it this way. We go ahead and select modify. We select the particular point and point, come back over here to the spline through points and create it. And first things first, make sure it is a reference line to identify it. There's one. Then we'll come back and we'll go ahead and select this one here and this one and do the same step of creating a line through the points and turning it into a reference point. And we have then this one here, which is going to be this point and this point. And then we'll go ahead and create a line through the points and turn it into a reference line in that way. Very well, let's go ahead and define our model points by going to make sure it's model. Let's make sure that we have point element set, and let's make sure that we have draw on face selected again also. Okay, and then we'll go ahead and pick 1 point here, 1 point here, and 1 point here. Once that's selected that way, or rather defined on the line segments or reference line segments that we have, let's go ahead and select escape to finish that. Let's go ahead and cancel here for now. Okay, then we'll go ahead and select the actual point so we can then define it, whether it's going to be at the beginning or at the end of this particular little segment that we have here. Okay, in order to do that, we'll go ahead and change the value here to 0.8 and see which way it goes. Okay, it's going to the far end here, as you can tell. This is actually the wrong point. So let's go ahead and delete that one. Let's reset it by hitting the tab and making sure that we're setting it on this little one here. Okay, now that we know that it is on that little segment there, we can go back and select it, and we can then go ahead and say it's from the beginning, 0.5. Let's go ahead and 0.8 to locate it easily. Okay, let's hit apply here. And then it's 0.8. It's telling us that the beginning is actually on this side. You see that? So I want this point not on the inner side of the actual triangle that we're defining here. We want it on the outer side because we're going to then create a line from this point to the new placement of the point here, and then a line from this point to that same new placement here. And we're going to repeat that on all three sides. Okay, so this point needs to be on the outside of the triangle. So let's go ahead and say that it's going to be from the end of the line, and let's see where it goes. It says 0.2. So let's go ahead and say 0.8, and it should then place it on the opposite side, which is where I want it. Perfect. Let's repeat the same process on all 3 points. Selecting this one. Okay, it's going to be 0.8 from the beginning. Make sure that it's set to the outside. Let's go ahead and say modify. Make sure that we've got that selected. 0.8 is the value from the beginning. Let's say apply. It's going to the inside. That means that this is going to have to switch to the endpoint and switch it back to 0.8%. Remember, this is the percentage value. Now, notice what happened. Once again, this line is on the wrong line. It's on the longer line rather than the short line. So we're going to have to get rid of that point again, go back to the model point and tab to make sure we place it on the right line, which is that short one. Once we have it selected and placed, let's go ahead and select it again. Make sure we have the values that we've been looking for. Okay, and say apply. It's at the outside, exactly where we want it, so we don't have to switch anything here. Let's go ahead and because these other two were actually done the same way, let's go ahead and erase this one. Or no, yeah, let's go ahead and delete that one and make sure that we create it properly. It's model, point, element, reserve. Okay, that's the one. Yes, tab, click on it. Okay, select it. Give it the value that we've been looking for, which is 0.8 right here. See where it goes. It goes exactly where we want it. This is great. Everything is looking exactly the way we want it. Remember, we're going to have a line from here to here to here, from here, then to here, and all the way across, creating a little bit of like a chevron here on all sides. And then we're going to connect these points here, these new points that we just defined, to the tops. And then we'll continue to define our triangular panel in this fashion. Now, because we want this value between this edge here and this point here to be something that we can actually control, why don't we go ahead and select this little puppy here, okay? Let's come over here to the normalized curve parameter, which was what the value that we were working with. Remember, that's the percentage value. And we'll select here and the create new parameter associated to this particular value. And we'll say new. We'll call this one offset. Offset. Let's go ahead and say okay to that. Okay, and we'll say okay. So now we make sure that all of these are controlled by the offset value. As far as the positioning is concerned. It's all set to the offset value, which is going to be right at the bottom here. Let's go ahead and say 0.25. Let's see where it moves it. Precisely. So we'll say 0.8, just the way we want it. It's now working very nicely as far as those movement of those points is concerned. And we will move forward by connecting the dots. And then after that point, we will then go ahead and create surfaces for each one of those points, but not before we convert those into reference lines. So let us begin. Let's go ahead and select this point here and this one. Okay, and we'll say it's created, and we'll go into reference. Do the same thing here from this point to this point here. Create line between those two. It is a reference. Okay, let's go ahead and this one to this one right here. Once more, we will continue with this process like this. Okay, and it becomes a reference point, or reference line rather. Oops, wrong one. It's going to be this one now with this one. And a reference. Oops, we didn't do that to that one. It is a reference like that. Then we'll do this in this fashion. It is a line that it is a reference. Okay, so as you can see here, okay, we've created the little chevrons that I told you that are going to be at the base of the actual triangle panel that we're creating. That actually will project away from the actual panel, and that is why we have this point right there, which we're going to now use to connect some of these points. Okay, what I've done now is just went ahead and rotated it so it's a little easier for me to select points. And let us begin. All of these points, in other words, this point here, all of the interior points, right, get connected to that vertical. And all of these exteriors of the triangle also get connected to that point. Okay, so let us begin by selecting this point and this one up there, which is the one that we have given it 4 feet. Select spline through points, and there's my point, and we'll convert it to a reference line. Okay, we will then continue with this point here, or rather, let's go ahead and make it sequential. This one, now we'll go ahead and do this one here. I gotta get a little bit close because it's gonna be between that one and that one. Okay, create point. It is a reference line. We will repeat the process just like this. There's another one, a reference line. We'll go ahead and select this and that one once again. Okay, almost done. We will select this one and this one like that. Make it into a reference line. And one last point, which is going to be this point here and this one right there, which will create then the reference point line between those 2 points like that. Very well. As you can see now, we've got our shape in a wireframe type of mode or a skeletal mode. Next step is actually going to be to go ahead and create the faces for each one of these parts. Once we do that, we'll just go ahead and create a massing family, subdivide it, and then go ahead and apply this particular panel to that. And so now to create the surfaces that are going to go into these triangles, what we do is we select the reference lines, this one, and this one. We come over here to the create form and go to solid. It's going to give me the option of giving me a 3D solid or a first face solid, which is what we want. We want a flat solid, which is that one. And we go back and we do that to all of these little triangles. So then we come and repeat the selection set for the second phase, which is this one. Oops. That one, this one, and this one. Once again, create it. Make sure you select the flat panel and continue the process. Tab to locate it. Moving on. I'm using the tab button to actually go ahead and cycle through whatever I can select specifically. Okay, and that's how I'm able to actually select something on top of the other, such as this right here. I'm just going to rotate it so I can see it better. Okay, and last one. And create our surface, flat surface as we wanted it. And there is our item. And the way we make sure that this is working properly before we actually bring it into a massing family type to test it completely is we go to the family types here, open that up. Let's go to the offset, which is the one that we have made that is a bit more easy to manipulate because it's an offset value that controls these distances. Remember that the height value controls that point. So let's go ahead and say that this is 0.25 and see where it lands. And once again, it's doing it exactly. Let's go ahead and say 0.8, just the way we want it. And say apply, it's working fine. Let's go ahead and say this is 6 feet to test that too. Beautiful. Let's go ahead and bring it back to 4 feet. Apply here. Let's go ahead and say OK to this. And let's go ahead now and create our new massing by going to File, New. We have a conceptual mass a selection option here, which is the one we want. it leads us directly to the mass Revit family type, and we'll say open. All right, we'll go ahead and create an arc first. Okay, escape. Let's go ahead and select the arc and extrude the arc to any height. Alrighty, let's go ahead and select the 3D face that is the resulting extrusion and divide it. And now this is where we have to start to be really careful, because whatever this division pattern is has to be the same as the one that we created for the particular panel. And that was the triangular bent, remember? So we select the actual face here that has been subdivided or surfaced or divided. And in the patterns, we look for the triangular bent, which is the one we used for the other one. So we'll go ahead and select triangular bent. Okay. Once we do that, we'll go back to the actual panel and we'll load the panel into the family by doing load into project. Okay. At which point, when we actually select the panel itself, or rather not the panel, but the curtain wall itself with the pattern on it, and we open up the selector, underneath the triangle bent, we have an option for a panel for this particular family style, and which is this one right here. Okay, and look and behold, there is the panel that we just created. Not only did we actually do this, but we can actually watch this, do so much to that by coming over here and hitting the tab button. So we select the actual extrusion. We'll go ahead and say, let's say, and add a profile. And let's say the profile is there somewhere. Okay, let's go ahead and tab, select, and edit profile. And let's go ahead and select that little profile that we had here. Okay, and then let's go ahead and select the arc and pull, make it a little bit more rounded like that, or rather a larger radius, and say check to see what happens. And it should actually start to adjust accordingly. As I said, everything is adjusting. Let's go ahead and see if we can actually check and modify the heights here, and maybe even the spacing between edges here by going into selecting the actual item, or rather not even selecting. I'm not selecting, I'm actually hovering, and I'll tab until I see my panel itself. Once I have the panel highlighted, I can then select the panel, and I can then go to the family types, edit style, or edit type rather, and in the edit type is where we have the actual values. For example, I can come in here and change that value to 6 feet, just like we did earlier, like that, and it will actually grow it 6 feet. Give it a second. Just like that. Let's say, for example, that on the offset, we wanted not 0.8, but let's say 0.125, which is going to be very narrow. You say apply and OK. Give it a second. And once again, there's your panel changing as we actually go ahead and switch those values that we actually defined in the panel itself. Okay, let's go ahead and undo here, because I really don't like that closeness. I actually like this one better. And it's these parameters that we created inside the actual panel itself have been now carried over into the actual curtain wall that is now using that panel. Now remember, the key point here is to use the same division style for defining the actual curtain panel and the actual curtain wall pattern that you're using on the model itself. Okay, once this is all done, you can very obviously then go ahead and import it into your projects and work on it as you need to. This has been Jim Cuervo with Digital Drafting Systems. Hoping you enjoyed this particular little blog on very typical or atypical panel for curtain walls based on patterns. I hope you are safe. Stay well. Till the next one. Thank you very much for watching.